Before we start, kindly subscribe to my channel and tell me, where in the universe are you watching from? Dant Cross, a seasoned ex-Special Forces soldier from Earth, woke up with a jolt. His head spun as he struggled to make sense of his surroundings. He had been on a routine deep space mission, but now he found himself in an unfamiliar, dimly lit room, shackled and thrown into a cage. His heart raced. He knew exactly what had happened. He had been captured. All around him, strange alien figures moved in and out of shadows, speaking a language he couldn't understand. He tried to move, but his arms were bound to the cold metal bars of his prison. The world outside his cage was alien and hostile. The smell of unfamiliar, pungent foods mixed with the sound of strange creatures in the distance. It was then that he heard footsteps approaching. Slow, deliberate, the kind of steps that commanded attention. A voice, deep, rich, and somehow regal, spoke. "This is the human slave," it said. Dante's gaze snapped up, only to be met by an alien woman with intense, commanding eyes. She was taller than any woman he had ever seen, at least a head above him, with a presence that instantly made him feel like a fly in the web of a spider. Her dark, glossy skin seemed to shimmer in the dim light, and her stance was powerful, almost predatory. She didn't look like the sort of being you'd want to anger, but Dante wasn't the type to bow to intimidation, especially from someone who saw him as nothing more than an object. The alien woman raised a hand, signaling for the guards to open the cage. They did, reluctantly, but Dante refused to make it easy. He pulled back, keeping his arms stiff as they tried to drag him out. "Get your filthy hands off me," he spat. To his surprise, the woman simply smirked. "Such spirit. I'll enjoy breaking you," she said in a tone that didn't sound angry, more like a challenge. "Good luck with that," Dante muttered, struggling free for a moment before the guards grabbed him again. He wasn't giving up without a fight, but he knew he had to pick his battles carefully. One wrong move, and he could end up dead. He was forced to stand before her, his legs shaky, his pride bruised but still intact. The woman's eyes studied him carefully, sizing him up. "You will make a fine warrior," she declared. "I have just bought you, human. You are mine now." Dante raised an eyebrow. "Is this some kind of joke?" The woman didn't smile. "I don't joke." The guards pushed him forward, and before Dante knew it, he was forced to kneel before her. He glared up at her, refusing to submit to the humiliation. But instead of striking him down, she simply circled around him like a predator examining its prey. "You will be trained. You will learn our ways, our culture, and become a warrior of my people," she said, her voice cold yet strangely intrigued. Dante clenched his fists, feeling the cold metal of his restraints against his skin. He wasn't sure how he was going to get out of this mess, but he sure as hell wasn't going to bend the knee to an alien queen, no matter how powerful she was. "What happens if I refuse?" he asked, his voice steady despite the growing unease in his chest. "You will die," she answered simply, her gaze unwavering. "But that choice will be yours." Dante's mind raced. Escape wasn't going to be easy, but he wasn't dead yet. He could outthink these aliens, outsmart them. He had no other choice. "Fine," he said, looking up at the towering alien woman. "I'll play along, for now." Her lips curled into a smile that sent a chill down his spine. "Good. I look forward to seeing how long you last." With that, the guards shoved him forward, and he was forced to follow the woman into the unknown world that awaited him, one where strength meant everything and submission meant nothing. Dante wasn't sure how he was going to survive, but he wasn't about to go down without a fight. Little did he know, the real battle wasn't just going to be for his survival. It was going to be for his very heart. Dante Cross didn't like being pushed around. Yet here he was, marched through the halls of an alien palace like a prized trophy, his hands bound in sleek metallic cuffs. Two guards flanked him, their weapons humming with an eerie energy. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to fight back, but he knew better. Not yet. The queen walked ahead, her presence commanding. She didn't even look back at him as she spoke. "You are in the heart of the Zyrexian Empire now. These walls have never been breached. You would do well to remember that, human." Dante smirked. "Guess there's a first time for everything." One of the guards growled and shoved him forward. He stumbled but quickly regained his balance. The queen finally turned her head slightly, just enough to give him a glance. He could tell she was amused. She led him into a massive chamber where dozens of warriors stood in disciplined rows. Their armor gleamed under the dim blue lighting, and every single one of them looked like they could tear him in half. Dante kept his expression neutral, but inside, he was already calculating. How many exits? How many guards? What weapons are within reach? His instincts were always on high alert. The queen raised a hand, and the room fell silent. This human has been bought under the highest honor. He is to be trained as one of us. A murmur spread through the warriors. A few of them outright laughed. One, a particularly massive Zyrexian with deep scars running across his arms, stepped forward. He sneered down at Dante. This weak creature, he wouldn't last a day in our trials. Dante rolled his shoulders, letting out a slow breath. Here we go. The queen tilted her head. Then let's find out. Before Dante could ask what that meant, the scared warrior lunged. Years of combat experience kicked in. Dante ducked just in time to avoid the alien's heavy fist. The ground shook where the blow landed. Without thinking, Dante pivoted, grabbing the warrior's outstretched arm and using his own momentum against him. With a sharp twist, the massive alien was thrown off balance, crashing onto the stone floor with a heavy thud. The room fell deathly silent. Dante straightened, shaking out his hands. Well, that was disappointing. The scared warrior growled, pushing himself up with rage in his eyes. But before he could attack again, the queen raised her hand. Enough. The warrior froze. Even Dante could sense the weight of her command. The queen stepped closer, stopping just inches from Dante. "You are bold," she said softly, her gaze unreadable. Dante held her stare. "Bold is how you survive." She smirked. "We shall see how long that holds true." She turned to the warriors. "Train him. If he fails, he dies. If he succeeds, well, then perhaps he is more than what he seems." The warriors nodded, though some still looked unconvinced. Dante exhaled slowly. So that's how it is. Trial by fire. He had been in worse situations before, but this was something else. The queen leaned in just a little. "You fight well, human, but do not mistake one victory for dominance." Dante smirked. "And don't mistake one loss for weakness." She didn't reply, but he could tell she was intrigued, and that, he realized, was both a good thing and a very dangerous thing. As the guards pulled him away toward the training grounds, he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. Dante Cross stood in the center of the training arena, rolling his shoulders as he studied his surroundings. The place was built like a coliseum, its walls towering high, with warriors lining the edges, watching with sharp, expectant eyes. The queen sat on an elevated throne-like platform above them all, observing silently. The scared warrior from earlier, who Dante now knew was named Korek, stood across from him, cracking his knuckles. "You got lucky before, human," Korek sneered. "But luck won't save you in the trials." Dante smirked. "Good thing I don't believe in luck." A deep, guttural horn sounded. The fight had begun. Korek charged first, moving faster than a being his size had any right to. But Dante had already been expecting it. Instead of meeting brute force with brute force, he dodged at the last second, pivoting to the side. Korek's massive fist slammed into the ground where Dante had been standing, sending cracks through the stone. The watching warriors let out murmurs of approval. At least this human wasn't completely useless. Dante used Korek's moment of unbalance to strike, delivering a sharp elbow to the back of his opponent's head. It wasn't enough to take him down, but it sent a message. "I'm not here to be a punching bag." Korek growled and swung again, this time catching Dante in the ribs. Pain shot through his body, but he didn't go down. He gritted his teeth. That's going to bruise. But pain was familiar, pain he could handle. He exhaled, waiting for Korek's next move. The warrior lunged again, expecting Dante to dodge the same way. Big mistake. Instead of avoiding the attack, Dante dropped low at the last second, sweeping Korek's legs out from under him. The massive alien crashed onto his back with a heavy thud that echoed across the arena. The watching warriors fell silent. Dante stood over his fallen opponent, hands on his hips. "You done." Korak's face twisted with rage, but before he could rise, the Queen's voice rang out. "Enough." At once, Korak froze, swallowing his anger. Dante turned to look up at her. Her expression was unreadable, but something in her eyes gleamed. Approval? Interest? He couldn't tell. She rose from her throne. "You fight well, Dante Cross." He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "I try." Some of the warriors let out short laughs. A human with wit. How unusual. The Queen stepped forward, descending the stone steps of her platform until she stood at the edge of the arena. But strength is not only measured in battle. You will face 3 trials. The first was combat. You have proven yourself, so far. Dante let out a slow breath. That was only round 1. Great. She continued. The second trial is one of endurance. A true warrior does not break, even under the harshest conditions. Dante raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. This involves pain, suffering, and some kind of death trap." The Queen's lips curved into a small, amused smile. "Something like that." Before Dante could question her further, the guards moved in, fastening heavy chains around his wrists. He frowned. "Not exactly fair, is it?" The Queen tilted her head. "A warrior must fight even when the odds are against him." Dante exhaled sharply. "Of course." The warriors led him away, and as he passed the Queen, he caught her watching him closely. He wasn't sure what game she was playing, but he had a feeling this was about more than just proving strength. And whether he liked it or not, he was now part of it. Dante Cross stood in the center of a vast circular chamber, his wrists still bound in heavy chains. The air was thick with heat, making it difficult to breathe. The walls pulsed with a faint glow, radiating an unnatural energy. He didn't know what kind of trial this was, but he could already tell it wasn't going to be pleasant. The Queen stood on a raised platform, her expression unreadable. "This is the trial of endurance," she announced, her voice echoing through the chamber. "You will not fight an enemy in this test. You will fight yourself." Dante raised an eyebrow. "Sounds vague. Got any details?" She ignored his sarcasm. "Pain, exhaustion, and fear will break a weak warrior. If you fall, you will not rise again." She gestured toward the guards. "Begin." Without warning, the floor beneath Dante shifted, and long metallic pillars shot up from the ground, forming an unpredictable maze. Before he could react, the first challenge struck. A sudden wave of electric energy surged through the metal cuffs around his wrists. A sharp, burning pain shot through his body, forcing him to his knees. His teeth clenched as he gritted through the agony. "They're testing my pain tolerance." Figures. Dante took a deep breath and pushed himself up, muscles aching. He had endured worse in his years of military training. If they thought a little electricity would break him, they were in for a disappointment. The moment he stood, the next trial began. The floor under him heated up, turning from solid stone to a molten-like surface, not enough to burn flesh, but enough to make every step painful. He clenched his jaw. "All right. Just keep moving." He forced himself forward, stepping carefully between the metal pillars. Each movement sent a jolt of pain through his legs, but he refused to stop. He wasn't about to give the Queen or her warriors the satisfaction of seeing him collapse. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Sweat dripped down his face, his breathing ragged. Then, a voice rang through the chamber. "You could surrender," the Queen said. Dante let out a breathless chuckle. "You must not know humans very well." For the first time, she seemed amused. Perhaps. The final challenge came swiftly. From the walls, sharp, needle-like darts shot toward him. Instinct took over. Even exhausted, Dante moved. Twisting, ducking, dodging with everything he had left. Some grazed his arms, leaving thin trails of blood. Others barely missed. His muscles screamed for rest, his vision blurred. But he kept going. One step, then another, and then silence. Dante collapsed onto one knee, panting. The heat faded. The electricity stopped. The darts ceased firing. He had made it. A slow, approving clap echoed in the chamber. The Queen stepped forward, standing at the edge of the platform. "Impressive," she said. Dante forced himself to his feet, rolling his shoulders. "Was that all you've got?" The watching warriors let out murmurs of surprise, some even grinning. A human with such resilience. Unheard of. The Queen studied him for a long moment before speaking again. You have passed the second trial. She tilted her head slightly, as if considering something. Few have endured so well. Dante exhaled, steadying himself. He didn't say it, but he could see it in her eyes. This wasn't just about proving himself anymore. Something had changed, and he wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a very, very dangerous one. Dad Cross leaned against the stone wall of his chamber, his body aching from the trial of endurance. His muscles burned, his wrists were raw from the metal cuffs, and every breath felt like he was inhaling fire. But he was still standing. That was what mattered. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Dante tensed, expecting another guard, another trial, another impossible challenge. Instead, it was her. The Queen stepped inside, moving with the same confidence she always carried. The air in the room shifted. Even though Dante had no chains now, there was something about her presence that made it impossible to ignore. "You recover quickly," she said, studying him. Dante smirked. "I don't have much of a choice, do I?" She tilted her head slightly, watching him with sharp eyes. "Most warriors take days to recover from the second trial. You are different." Dante exhaled, running a hand through his sweat-damp hair. "Yeah, I get that a lot." For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was an unspoken tension in the room, not the kind of hostility Dante had felt when he first arrived, but something else, something strange. Finally, the Queen crossed her arms. "You were not born into this world, yet you fight like one of us. Why?" Dante's smirk faded slightly. He thought about the battles he had fought before ending up in this alien empire. The wars, the losses, the scars, both seen and unseen. "Because I don't know how to do anything else," he admitted. She watched him carefully. "Survival." "Survival," he echoed. For the first time, she nodded in understanding. It wasn't a queen speaking to a warrior anymore. It was one survivor recognizing another. Then, just as quickly as the moment came, it was gone. She straightened, returning to her regal demeanor. "Tomorrow, you will face the final trial." Dante raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. More pain? More near-death experiences?" The Queen smirked. "No, this trial is different." She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "It is not your body that will be tested, but your mind." Dante's amusement faded. "What's that supposed to mean?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned toward the door. Before stepping out, she glanced back at him, her expression unreadable. "Rest while you can, Dante Cross. Tomorrow, everything changes." Then she was gone. Dante let out a long breath, running a hand over his face. Great, because the last two trials were so easy. As he sat down, leaning his head back against the cool stone, one thought kept circling in his mind. Why was she looking at him like that? And why did he care? Dante Cross stood in the center of the grand hall, his fists clenched at his sides. The Queen sat upon her throne, watching him with an unreadable expression. Warriors lined the walls, their sharp eyes fixed on him. Unlike the last two trials, there were no weapons, no searing heat, no electric shocks. But something told him that this test would be far worse. The Queen finally spoke. "You have proven your strength. You have endured pain and suffering. But now you must prove something greater." Dante raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" She leaned forward slightly. "Loyalty." A murmur rippled through the warriors. Dante felt his instincts go on high alert. Loyalty? To what? To her? To this empire? He didn't like the sound of it. A side door opened, and two guards stepped inside, dragging another human between them. Dante's stomach tightened. The man was battered, his clothes torn, his face bruised. But he was alive, and he was human. Dante's jaw clenched. He had no idea who this guy was, but that didn't matter. He was from Earth. That made him important. The Queen stood. "This human is a known traitor, a spy who conspired against my empire. He has been sentenced to death." Dante narrowed his eyes. "And you brought him here because—" She descended the steps of her throne, stopping just a few feet away from him. "Because you will be the one to execute him." Silence. Dante's heartbeat pounded in his ears. So that's the test. Not strength, not endurance, loyalty. If he did what she asked, he would prove himself to the Empire. He would earn his place. But if he refused, the warriors around the hall waited, their expressions cold, expectant. The Queen watched him closely, her face calm but unreadable. Dante exhaled, rolling his shoulders. You're testing me. She tilted her head. Of course. Dante looked at the man on the ground. The guy's breathing was ragged, but he was awake. He stared up at Dante, his eyes pleading but silent. This wasn't just about loyalty. This was about control. Dante turned back to the Queen, his expression unreadable. And if I refuse? Her gaze didn't waver. Then you fail the trial. Dante let out a slow breath. There it is. The trap. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, Dante smirked. Then I fail. A ripple of shock moved through the watching warriors. A few muttered under their breath. Others looked to the Queen, waiting for her reaction. The Queen remained still. You understand what that means. Dante crossed his arms. Yeah, but let's be honest. If I killed a defenseless man just because you told me to, would I really be the kind of warrior you want? Silence. Then, something unexpected. The Queen laughed. It was soft at first, barely more than a breath. But then it grew, a genuine, amused laugh that left the warrior stunned. Dante arched an eyebrow, but he didn't dare interrupt. Finally, she stopped, shaking her head slightly. You are bold, Dante Cross. He grinned. I try. She turned to the warriors. This trial is complete. More whispers, but no one dared challenge her word. The guards pulled the human prisoner away, though Dante had no idea what would happen to him. He wanted to ask, but something told him not to push his luck. The Queen faced him again. You have passed. Dante blinked. Wait, really? She smirked. You are strong, and you endure suffering. But above all, you are your own man. That is what makes you valuable. Dante let out a slow breath. Well, that was unexpected. And as the Queen turned, walking away with an air of finality, one thought echoed in his mind. This isn't over, not by a long shot. Dante Cross sat on the stone bench in his chamber, rubbing his sore wrists. The final trial was over. He had won, or at least, he hadn't died, so that was something. But instead of relief, his mind raced with questions. Why had the Queen laughed? Why had she let him pass when he had defied her test? And most of all, what happened now? The answer came sooner than expected. The door slid open, and once again she entered. The Queen. She moved with the same quiet confidence, but this time something felt different. The air between them had changed. You are restless, she observed, stopping a few feet away. Dante exhaled, leaning back against the wall. Yeah, well, it's not every day I survive an alien trial just to be left waiting around. She gave a slight nod. You did more than survive. Dante met her gaze. All right, enough games. What happens now? For a moment, she didn't answer. Then, she took a slow step forward. You are no longer a slave, Dante Cross. His eyes widened slightly. Come again. You proved yourself in the trials. You are now recognized as a warrior of this empire. Your chains are gone. Dante slowly stood. He searched her expression, looking for some kind of trick, but he found none. He was free, just like that. He'd let out a low whistle. Well, didn't see that coming. She studied him carefully. There is more. Dante folded his arms. Of course there is. The Queen took another step closer. You are a warrior now, but warriors serve a purpose. I have a proposition for you. Dante raised an eyebrow. A job offer? From a woman who bought me as a slave. He let out a dry chuckle. That's a first. She didn't react to his sarcasm. Instead, her voice was steady, unwavering. I need a consort. Dante froze. His brain needed a second to process that. Did she just say? A what now? A consort, she repeated, watching his reaction closely. A partner, an equal. Dante blinked. Hold on. Are you asking me to marry you? The Queen smirked slightly. It is not a request. It is an offer. Dante ran a hand down his face. Wow, okay, that's a lot. He exhaled, trying to think. You do realize I'm human, right? She tilted her head. Yes, and? He laughed under his breath. And you think your people are just gonna accept that? The queen of a warrior empire choosing the human. There was a pause. Then she said, they will not question what they cannot challenge. Dodd stared at her, realizing the weight of her words. She's serious. He had expected his fate to be decided for him from the start. He thought he'd either be a prisoner, a soldier, or dead. But this. He shook his head, a smirk tugging at his lips. You really don't do things halfway, do you? She stepped closer, her voice quieter now. You are different, Dante Cross. You defied my trials. You faced death without fear. And you intrigue me. Dante felt his pulse quicken. There was something in her voice, not just confidence, but curiosity, interest. He let out a breath. And what if I say no? The queen studied him, then spoke with certainty. You won't. Dante narrowed his eyes, but she wasn't wrong, was she? Because deep down, he already knew the answer, and that terrified him more than any trial ever could. Dante Cross paced across the chamber, running a hand through his hair. His mind was still spinning. The consort. Marriage? He had survived torture, battles, and impossible trials, but somehow this was the thing that left him speechless. The queen stood nearby, watching him with her usual composed expression. But there was something different in her eyes, something almost uncertain. Dante stopped pacing and exhaled. Let me get this straight. You want me, a human you bought as a slave, to become your what? Husband, king. She stepped forward. A consort. You would stand beside me, but my rule remains my own. Dante let out a dry chuckle. Oh, great. So I get all the danger with none of the power. She smirked. You would have influence. He crossed his arms. And if I refuse? She was silent for a moment. Then, to his complete shock, she said, then I will have to convince you. Dante blinked. Wait, are you bargaining with me? The queen's sharp confidence didn't waver, but there was a flicker of something else. Something rare. Vulnerability. I do not beg, she said, her voice softer now, but I will not let you walk away. Dante searched her face. For the first time, he saw past the warrior, past the ruler. She wasn't just choosing him because of his strength or his victories. She wanted him. Not as a soldier, not as a tool, but as a partner. His heart pounded. He had spent his whole life fighting, surviving, never belonging anywhere. Now, a queen, this queen, was asking him to stay. Dante took a slow breath, then smirked. All right, Your Majesty. Let's hear your best argument. And for the first time, the queen smiled.